You've heard of Achilles, Leonidas, and Joan of Arc. But what if the most incredible warriors in history are the ones whose names you've never even heard? Not because they weren't legendary, but because their stories were so disruptive, they were pushed to the margins, buried in footnotes, or twisted into something else entirely. Today, we're digging them up. From a wrestling princess who collected husbands like battlefield trophies, to a rebel queen who brought an empire to its knees. These are 4 unbelievable warriors history tried to forget. You know the saying, history is written by the victors. It's a cliche, because it's true. Empires control the archives, and sometimes the most amazing figures get scrubbed from the page because they challenge the official story. They were too successful, the wrong gender, or from the wrong place to be remembered properly. So today, we're looking at 4 warriors whose real-life achievements are wilder than any myth, but whose legacies were buried. If you're into uncovering the stories that got left out of the history books, make sure you subscribe because we're just getting started. Our first warrior comes from 3rd century Vietnam, a land under the control of Chinese imperial rule. While official Chinese records of the time loved to document their own generals and victories, they made sure to downplay one of their most formidable opponents, a 20-year-old rebel leader named Triu Thao Trin, better known as Lady Triu. Around 248 CE, she exploded onto the scene, leading a massive rebellion against the occupying Eastern Wu dynasty. Before she was even 21, Lady Triu had orchestrated a string of successful battles against the Chinese forces. She was a master of guerrilla warfare, but it was her presence on the battlefield that became legendary. Known as the Lady General clad in golden robe, she led her troops wearing brilliant yellow, and most famously riding a war elephant. Her success was so inspiring that even her own brother, who first tried to talk her out of rebelling, ended up joining her army and serving under her command. Together, they shook the very foundations of Chinese control. So why isn't she a household name? Because empires control the narrative. For Chinese historians, the idea of being repeatedly beaten by a young, female-led rebellion was a huge embarrassment that flew in the face of their patriarchal society. So their official records just mentioned suppressing a minor rebellion by bribing some locals, a much tidier story than the truth of being outmaneuvered by a brilliant young general on an elephant. It was the Vietnamese people themselves, through their oral traditions, who refused to let her be forgotten. The legends they told became fantastical. Some said she was 9 feet tall with 3 foot long breasts she'd sling over her shoulders before a fight. These myths, while wild, acted as a sort of cultural time capsule, preserving her memory when the official history wouldn't. After 6 months of intense fighting, the Eastern Wu dynasty sent one of their top generals, Liu Yin, who finally defeated her army with overwhelming force and by bribing some of her own commanders. Facing capture, Lady Triu refused to surrender. Instead, at just 23 years old, she took her own life, becoming a martyr for Vietnamese independence. Next, we're off to the 13th century Mongol Empire, home to our second warrior, Princess Khutulun. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan himself. And in a culture that valued strength above all, she was an absolute powerhouse. Her specialty was wrestling, which for the Mongols was essential military training. There were no weight classes, no gender divisions, you just had to get your opponent to touch the ground. And Khutulun never lost. This isn't just a story. It's confirmed by multiple sources, including Marco Polo and the Persian historian Rashid al-Din. Her father, a powerful Khan named Kaidu, adored her and often relied on her military advice. But her wrestling skill created a small problem. When it was time to get married, Khutulun wasn't interested in being a political bargaining chip. So she issued an incredible challenge. Any man who could defeat her in a wrestling match could marry her. The catch? If he lost, he had to give her his horses, sometimes as many as 100 per match. Suitors came from all over, eager to win the hand of the famous princess. None of them stood a chance. According to the accounts, Khutulun ended up with a legendary herd said to number 10,000 horses from all her defeated opponents. The most famous story involves a prince so confident he wagered 1,000 horses on his victory. Her parents actually begged her to throw the match so she'd finally get married. She refused. In front of the entire court, she grappled with the prince and, as Marco Polo put it, tossed him to the ground as easily as if he were a kid. But she wasn't just a wrestler. She was a terrifying military commander. She had a signature battlefield move. Riding alongside her father, she would spot an enemy commander, charge straight into their ranks, snatch the target, and drag him back to her father's army as a prisoner. Marco Polo wrote that she did this as deftly as a hawk pounces on a bird. So how does a warrior princess like this get forgotten? Her story was so incredible it was turned into a fantasy. Her legend is thought to be one of the inspirations for the famous opera Turandot. But in the opera, the princess challenges suitors with riddles, not wrestling holds. The real Khutulun's physical dominance and military genius were softened into a fairy tale, burying the undefeated warrior who chose her own fate. Now we'll go. For our third warrior, we travel to 10th century Ethiopia and the powerful kingdom of Aksum. For centuries, Aksum was a major Christian power, but its golden age was ending, creating the perfect conditions for a massive rebellion led by a woman known only as Gudit. The story of Gudit is shrouded in legend, but what we know is explosive. Her name can mean fire in Amharic, and she came from outside the ruling Christian elite. Historical interpretations suggest she belonged to a subjugated group, possibly the Aga people, whose culture was being suppressed by the state. She wasn't just a random invader. She was a reaction to the empire's own injustice. Around the year 960, Gudit returned at the head of a rebel army. She didn't just attack the military. She attacked the empire's identity. She systematically destroyed the symbols of Aksumite power. Churches were burned, monuments were toppled, and she is said to have hunted down the royal family, ending a dynasty that had ruled for over 1,000 years. Her place in history was then rewritten by her enemies. When a new Christian dynasty, the Zagwe, eventually rose to power, they needed to legitimize their rule. To do that, they needed a villain. So they launched a propaganda campaign, recasting Gudit from a political rebel into a demonic, monstrous witch. They called her Gudit the Destroyer and told stories of how she laid waste to the land out of pure evil. This new narrative conveniently skipped over the possible context, the oppression her people may have faced, and the political instability that she exploited. By turning her into a one-dimensional monster, the new rulers erased the uncomfortable truth that the old empire had become so fragile that it inspired a woman to burn it all down. Our final warrior story lands us in 16th century Japan, right in the middle of a chaotic civil war. It's here that one of the most powerful warlords in Japanese history, Oda Nobunaga, met a man who would defy every rule of the era. The man was an African, his original name lost to history, who became known as Yasuke. Yasuke arrived in Japan in 1579 with an Italian Jesuit missionary, likely serving as his bodyguard. He was a giant of a man, described as having the might of 10 men, and his arrival in Kyoto caused a near riot. The commotion got back to Oda Nobunaga, who demanded a meeting. Nobunaga was so stunned he thought Yasuke's skin was painted with ink and ordered him scrub it. But that initial shock quickly turned into deep respect. Nobunaga was impressed by Yasuke's strength, but also his intelligence. In a very short time, Nobunaga took Yasuke into his personal service. He was given a home, a salary, and the ultimate status symbol, his own katana sword. Yasuke had become a samurai, a retainer in the inner circle of the most powerful man in Japan. This was completely unprecedented. He fought for the Oda clan. In 1582, Yasuke was with Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple when one of Nobunaga's own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, betrayed him. Akechi's army attacked the temple. Nobunaga had only a few dozen guards, including Yasuke. They fought desperately but were overwhelmed. Facing defeat, Nobunaga committed seppuku, the ritual suicide of a samurai. Yasuke was captured, but the traitorous general, viewing him as a foreigner, spared his life and handed him back to the Jesuits. And after that, Yasuke vanishes from the historical record. For centuries, the incredible story of the first and only known African samurai was treated as a bizarre footnote, a curiosity rather than the groundbreaking achievement it was, effectively writing him out of the main event. From the jungles of Vietnam to the wrestling rings of Mongolia, from the highlands of Ethiopia to the temples of feudal Japan, these warriors weren't just fighters. Lady Triyu was downplayed by an empire too proud to admit defeat. Khutulun was mythologized until her real strength was forgotten. Gudit was demonized to serve a political narrative, and Yasuke was sidelined as a historical curiosity. Their stories prove that history is a battlefield of its own, where inconvenient truths are often the first casualties. Which of these warriors do you think was the most unbelievable? And are there other forgotten figures whose stories we should tell? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more stories that history tried to forget, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.